I came to the floor today, though, to join my colleague, Senator Landrieu from Louisiana, to talk about Russian adoptions and the decision by the Russian Duma and the President Putin, to sign a law that includes a provision that bans adoption of Russian children by American families. And this ban would go into effect, Mr. President, tomorrow. A ban that would go into effect tomorrow with 4 dozen American families in the process of bringing a child home from Russia. You know, my wife, Abby, and I adopted our son, Charlie, from Russia a number of years ago now, and after visits to Russia, and as we were leaving the courthouse the day that the court procedures were accomplished, we were in the car with people who had helped us with that adoption, who represented an organization here in the United States, in this case, the Gladney organization in Texas. And they got a call that 4 of their fellow organizations had just been decertified in Russia. And they were decertified for some technical reason, as their papers regarding all of the adoptions they had done were reviewed, and at least one error was found in one paper somewhere. And, Mr. President, over the course of the next 12 months, as every single agency came up, and this is about 6 years ago, as every single agency came up for review, every one of them had a problem that wound up them being disqualified. And at the end of that year, there wasn't a single American organization that could be helpful to an American family with a Russian adoption, because that was the policy the government decided at that time. They were going to somehow penalize American families who wanted to adopt Russian kids in ways that made that virtually impossible. And at that time, Mr. President, there were families who had met a child, who had bonded with that child, who'd taken pictures home, who'd talked to doctors in Russia and the United States, who had done everything you needed to do, who had even gotten ready to go to court. I think at that point, if you had gone to court, you probably took your child home with you. Not the case right now. But they all were caught in a situation where in some cases it was 2 or 3 more years before that adoption was allowed to be completed, if it was ever allowed to be completed. Now, the Russian government has decided once again to use Russian kids in orphanages as political pawns to help create some international dispute with the United States. This is not behavior that is worthy of the credit that, frankly, we just gave the Russians whenever we entered into a trade agreement that said we want to accept you further into the relationships we have. And by the way, I've talked to parents in the last few days who have adopted children from Russia. And these are parents who, like every one of us in this room right now on the floor of the Senate, grew up at a time when the Soviet Union was seen as a great adversary. But suddenly, the bonding that occurs between our two countries because of this opportunity for Russian kids to become American kids made a big difference in the way that Americans looked at Russians and the way that Russians looked at Americans. But this is a difference that somehow the Russian government wants to do away with, as they take offense because we appropriately, I think, put in the Russian trade agreement penalties for people who were involved in the imprisonment and death of the Russian attorney Sergei Magnitsky in 2009. We were pretty specific about the narrow group this applied to. They're very specific about the 110,000 kids in orphanage in Russia today that couldn't be adopted by American families because they've decided to use these kids as a political tool. It is the wrong thing to do. Russia and the United States have had a tradition now that goes back to the end of the Cold War of working together to find permanent homes for children without parents in our country. As recently as November of last year, November 1 of last year, we signed a bilateral agreement to strengthen the procedural safeguards for this process so that families that got involved in this process wouldn't get way down the line or get into the line at all and find out, no, you're not going to be able to let this happen. We have one family in St. Louis that has adopted, have gone to court, have been to Russia multiple times. The court has said, you are now the adoptive parents, the Russian court of this child, but under the new requirement, you have to wait another 30 days before you can come back and take this child home. And how the Russian government says you can never take this child home. It's totally, Mr. President, unacceptable. Last week, Senator Landrieu and I, along with at least a dozen other senators, sent a letter to President Putin urging him not to violate the agreement by signing the law. And, Mr. President, I'd like to submit that letter into the record without objection.
Without objection.
And he signed the law anyway. Senator Landrieu and I are going to have a resolution that she's going to talk about, asking that not only that this position be reversed, but that immediately we do whatever's necessary to unite these families that have already bonded with Russian children who are in orphanages in Russia. I talked to a number of parents just yesterday. Bob and Sandy Davis in St. Louis have been very involved in efforts for adoptive children from Russia and the Ukraine. I talked to a young man this morning, Sergey Quincy from Branson, who's 22, who was adopted by the Quincy's in Branson when he was 14. He comes to the United States, doesn't speak any English, starts the 9th grade, learns English. 22, he's now happily married with a couple of young children. And he told me, he said that the moment of his adoption was the moment that made his dreams possible. In a bad family situation, institutionalized with his brother and his sister in 3 different orphanages, and the moment of his adoption, and his brother was adopted by the same family who didn't know about his sister, made this possible. I talked to Senator John Lamping in Missouri, who adopted a son who's now 14, who had never gone to school when he was adopted at 8 or 9 years old, had never been to school anywhere. I would hope, Mr. President, that the Senate speaks strongly, that we work as effectively as we can with Russian representatives in this country to help them right this wrong. The immediate and unbelievable wrong for almost 50 families who know the child that they are about to bring into their family and emotionally and psychologically already have. And for all—
is expired.
30 seconds?
Without objection.
Mr. President. And for all the United States, all of those kids who are likely to spend their growing up years in an orphanage and at 15 or 16 be put out of that orphanage with no support system while there are families in the United States of America that want to make them part of their family. And as I close, I'd just like to close by saying that I continue to appreciate the great leadership on all these adoption issues that Senator Landrieu has shown, and look forward to working with her and others as we try to help right this tragic wrong.